Chapter 20. Around mid-afternoon, the next day, a well-rested Anna and Daniel arrived at Gary Robertson's apartment, just inside the northern perimeter of the city. They had decided to get to his home early while he was still at work and confront him later. Illegal, of course, but they were already on the wrong side of the law. Anna didn't expect Robertson to be home, but she activated the door chime to be sure. When no one answered, she used the agency unlock code to disassemble the door. Entering, they found a handful of somewhat messy rooms furnished with a modest selection of furniture, a stereotypical lower-income bachelor pad. Daniel surveyed the apartment. This isn't the lair of a criminal mastermind. She rolled her eyes. You watch too many action vids. Guilty, but I didn't expect a criminal mastermind. Robertson is a small cog in a big machine. They poked around, starting with the living room, then working through the kitchen, the 2 bedrooms, and finally the sole bathroom. Anna recorded everything as they went, scanning with her data lens. They found signs of normal living: an open book lying on the coffee table, unwashed dishes, dirty laundry, and an unmade bed. The second bedroom contained an exercise cycle and some weights. After their quick survey, they returned to the living room, and Anna determined they'd gathered as much as they could by observation alone. Time to hack into the data system and see what you can find. Yes, dear. Daniel assembled his keyboard on the kitchen table. She sat down beside him and watched as he hacked his way in, enjoying this chance to work together. Accustomed to their typical arrangement, where she told him what had happened during an investigation and he tweaked her mods for the next one, she decided she preferred this integrated approach. After a moment, he sent a vid feed to her data lens. I've hooked into the building security system. While I'm working on this stuff, you can watch for Robertson. Got it. The feed showed live images of the building's transport dock. As she observed a bus stop and pickup awaiting couple, she mused wistfully that during a normal stakeout she'd rely on Simon to keep an eye on things like this. After a few minutes, Daniel blew out a disappointed stream of air. Oh, there's very little here, I'm afraid. It seems like he keeps his personal and work life separate. Nothing about what he did for Radon? He shook his head. He made social media posts about being on an out-of-town assignment for an extended period of time, didn't mention El Paso, and there's no activity from when he was there. Other than that, not much. She nodded. That's what I saw when I found his profile. It makes sense. Whoever sent him wouldn't want his location to be super obvious. You think it was Radon? I assume so, but I can't say for sure. Hopefully we'll get a better idea when we talk to him. Any interesting relationships? Family? Long-term romantic partners? Not that I can see. He hasn't been talking to his parents or siblings recently. Very distant. No ongoing romances, just dating apps and such. He's heterosexual and has had his fair share of liaisons if we go by the Cupid catalog. His reviews are average enough. Daniel's face screwed up with distaste. Does this bother you? She raised an eyebrow. Digging into personal data? Most of the time. Not as much today, because Robertson's kind of a sleaze. Usually we have a warrant. Usually? She held her hands up helplessly. Well, we can't work through the system this time, but we're probably giving him a gift by doing this. He can claim that any evidence we have against him isn't legal if he finds out about the search. And if he goes free in the end, I won't cry about it. He isn't the one we're really after. I suppose. She hadn't convinced him, nor herself. In truth, if Robertson was guilty, the courts would come up with a way to put him away, illegal searches aside. Anna would be written up, but at this point that was a laughable consequence compared to everything else going on. Daniel sighed. For the most part, Robertson is a regular guy with a pretty simple life. A reader, watches vids, doesn't eat out much, likes the ladies. Political views? He shook his head. Nothing I can find. He's not a card-carrying member of A Better Way, and he doesn't consume media focused on Shaw or any other politicians. Anna considered this. She'd suspected Robertson wasn't political based on what she'd read about him on her own, but that meant his interactions with Ben Jacobs weren't driven by his own agenda. They'd been an assignment. From Radon? Or had he done work for someone else on the side? Daniel interrupted her thoughts. So that's about all I have. Now we wait? Yes, but not here. She stood up and gestured to the room. Let's lock up. He joined her, disassembling his keyboard before they made their way to the front door. As Anna crossed the threshold out into the hallway, she turned and made a gesture to the apartment. Items they disturbed slid back into place, leaving it the same as when they'd entered. Daniel let out an uncomfortable sound that bordered on laughter. Oh, I was proud of that, Maud. Now I'm not so sure how I feel about it. It's very clever. As I said, I do usually have a warrant. Don't tell me how many times you've used it without one. She gave him a mischievous smile. Not too many. They waited down the hall, around a corner, and out of sight of the apartment. They both watched the feed now, looking for Robertson. Daniel shuffled his feet with a nervous energy. You do this kind of thing a lot? Sometimes. It depends on the crime and how you catch the criminal, but I've been on quite a few stakeouts. At least in this case, we have a good idea when he'll get home. They fell into silence, watching through their data lenses. A sense of calm descended on Anna, the anxiety apparent on Daniel's face dulled by her experience. She briefly considered sending him back to the safe house before confronting Robertson, but elected not to. They were in it together at this point, and should finish it that way. Robertson arrived a little after sundown, stepping off a bus at the building's transport dock. Anna recognized him from the cash machine recording, dark-haired and tall. He wore a long coat that flowed from his neck down to well-kept dress shoes. Even through the feed, Anna noted how he carried himself with confidence and a certain charisma. She felt Daniel tense up next to her and glanced at him. We'll let him get to the apartment first, then we can go talk. Sounds good. They gave Robertson a few minutes to make his way to the apartment. When enough time had passed, Anna touched Daniel's shoulder. Let's go. She started moving, and he trailed behind her. When she got to Robertson's door, she activated the door chime for the second time this evening. This time, he answered. A segment of the door thinned to reveal his face, and after a brief pause studying Anna, recognition registered in his eyes. She wished she could tell whether he recalled her face from media reports or because someone had alerted him that she'd be coming. Reminding herself that no one knew about his involvement but she, Daniel, and Jada, she assumed the former. She sent Robertson her agency identification, which conveniently left out her status as a wanted fugitive. Gary Robertson, I'm Special Agent Anna Flynn with the MMD agency. We'd like to have a few words with you. Robertson let out an annoyed sigh and examined her documentation, then glanced at Daniel. Who's he? An advisor. May we step inside? He paused a beat, then shrugged. Sure. The door vanished, and he stood aside to let the pair in. He'd shed his coat, and now had on a tight, stylish shirt which clung to his muscular body. This, along with his strong jawline, made him a good-looking man and explained the numerous Cupid catalog entries Daniel had found. As she and Daniel entered his living room and sat down, he didn't ask them if they wanted water. This was going to be straight to business. Anna approved. Robertson took a seat in a crimson armchair and leaned back, his manner somehow declaring himself king of this castle, which Anna thought was fair, and is right, if a bit silly. What can I do for you, Agent Flynn? We're conducting an investigation you're involved in, but I'd like some background about you before we talk about that. Would you mind telling me what you do for a living? I work for Radon Security as a consultant. And what does a consultant do at Radon? Robertson's face didn't smirk, but his tone did as his eyes shifted to Daniel. I consult. Anna withheld her response, letting the silence speak for her. After a moment, Robertson looked back at her with tight lips. Fine, I do whatever they tell me. One week, it's chatting up some computer nerd the company suspects has broken into a client's system. The next, I might be rubbing elbows with one of our customers' competitors. A lot of face-to-face jobs? He gave her a toothy smile. Yeah, well, obviously, I'm not exactly the technical type. My skills are more about person to person. Anna guessed at the subtext and did her best to mask her disgust. Your relationship with Ben Jacobs is of particular interest to us. If this surprised Robertson, he didn't show it. I see. Just start from the beginning. The beginning of what? The question was calm, but something contentious lurked in his eyes. Please don't play around with me, Mr. Robertson. You could go down very hard for what Jacobs did, but I don't think you planned it by yourself. I want you to tell me who pulled your strings. He flipped his palms out, suggesting the answer was obvious. The same people who always pull my strings. Radon Security? They are my employer. So they instructed you to turn Ben Jacobs to murder? No, they did not. No? No. The repetition was flat and firm. But look, I know what Jacobs did, and if you're planning to pin it on me, I'm calling my lawyer. Anna hesitated. If he lawyered up, it would make further discussion impossible. She needed him to keep talking. You could do that, but it'd be easier for all of us if you'd tell us a bit more. We can keep it off the record, but you need to see it from our perspective. It looks to us like you're to blame for what Ben did, especially if you won't give us another name. Is there another story? If so, we'd love to hear it. Robertson looked between them both suspiciously, then settled his attention on Anna. Whatever. Look. Yes, I talked to Ben, but I didn't have any idea he'd attack anybody. It was just an assignment. From Radon? Yeah, they gave me the job. My boss told me to go to El Paso and befriend this guy, pretend to be a member of A Better Way, talk to him about Shaw, and let him believe there was this inside thing going, and he could be a part of it to make a big splash. Anna cocked her head. A big splash? Robertson held out his hands defensively. Not like a bomb. As far as I understood it, we were going to march him to Houston and put him in front of the press with a sob story about losing his house. Daniel shifted in his seat, and Robertson noted the movement. You have something to say? Daniel cleared his throat, his discomfort obvious. Ben lost his house because Shaw took it away. You seem unbothered by his so-called sob story. Robertson waved dismissively. Sue me. I've seen a lot in this business. Life is hard. Don't take that the wrong way. I'd be angry in his position, too. I've never had a family home like what he and his wife had, but I imagine it was painful to lose. But what can I do about it? I didn't take away his land. Anyway, I didn't have to do much other than give him a chance to feel heard. I spend a few months letting him talk at me, and then one day he up and goes to Houston and tries to off Shaw. He already had a short fuse before I met him. Anna had her doubts. You were surprised when he left El Paso? Yep, I had no idea. Went to a meetup one day and he wasn't there. I got a message from the boss to come back to Houston, so I did. Next time I saw Jacobs was on the news after he blew himself up. And that was that? That was that. Anger rose in both Anna and her voice. If you didn't think he was going to be so violent, why didn't you go to the police after he attacked Shaw? They could have used your information. You're culpable here. You knew his end goal the whole time. He straightened and glared at her with unnerving dark eyes. Am I under arrest? She did her best not to squirm under his gaze. Not yet. He huffed and looked away with a sneer. I wonder why that is. If you had anything on me, you'd have me in cuffs. He held up his hands. But nothing so far. You aren't the big fish, and you know it. I want the person who sent you. He crossed his arms. I'm sure you do, and that's why I never went to the police, because the people you want would be unhappy with me if I did, and I'm not going to make them unhappy." "Radon?" He scoffed. "I don't know about your advisor, but you're a smart enough lady to know better than that. But, as I said, I do what I'm told. My boss instructed me to encourage Ben Jacobs to speak out against Shaw, so that's what I did. If it didn't work out the way the client wanted, I can't help that. I didn't try to make him murder anyone." "It's not in your character?" His mouth curled into a wicked smile. "It wasn't in the pay." "Of course." She bent forward. "Look, I'm going to need something from you, Mr. Robertson. I understand you're scared, but you can't keep protecting these people." He spread out his hands. "I'm not sensing any reason to help you out. You haven't offered me a deal." "Do I need to?" "Of course. I didn't do anything wrong or illegal, but you make it sound like I'm on the hook for a multiple homicide. I want immunity." "I can't do that. We'd have to get lawyers involved." "That's what I said earlier, but you wanted me to tell you why this isn't my fault, so against my better judgment, I did." Daniel interrupted, his voice contemptuous. "Just because you didn't mean for it to happen doesn't absolve you. Let's be clear. You pushed a man to commit violence." Robertson eyed Daniel darkly. "Oh, so now you decide to say something. What advising do you actually do?" "I can tell you I don't manipulate people." Robertson frowned, then stood up, his tone cutting like a sharp dagger. "What are you implying about my work?" Daniel rose to his feet to match Robertson, and Anna did the same, alarm bells ringing in her head. She put a hand on her husband's arm and gave it a gentle tug. "Careful." But everything about Daniel's posture challenged Robertson. "You know precisely what I'm saying. You exploit people for a living. You exploited Ben Jacobs." Robertson lurched toward Daniel, entering his space and looming over him as a muscle pulsed in his neck. "I'd listen to your woman if I were you." Anna pulled the staff handle off her waist, ready to assemble it when Daniel's arm rotated in her hand. She looked down to see him making a wait gesture with his palm. Her gaze moved up to his stoic face. She watched him closely, uncertain what he was planning. Robertson glared at Daniel, clearly expecting him to beg off and cower. "Cat got your tongue? Good. You should consider your next words carefully." The men locked eyes, both exuding strength, but one of stillness and conviction, the other of anger and dominance. "I think deeply about all my words." Daniel delivered this with such a cool steadiness that Anna almost smiled. It drove Robertson crazy. Something snapped, and in a flash of movement the man's right fist smashed into Daniel's jaw. Daniel put one hand up in self-defense and flailed with the other, knocking the data lens off Robertson's face as he crumpled to the floor. Without hesitating, Anna triggered her staff and jammed it into Robertson's chest, hard. He fell back from the blow, yelling out in pain as he landed on his back. In less than a second, she stood over him, her weapon inches from his skull. "Bad move." The words were guttural, her voice a growl. Robertson glared at her, his expression hard and defiant, but he understood the situation well enough to stay down and keep quiet. He was at her mercy. Hearing motion behind her, Anna glanced back to see Daniel pulling himself off the floor, a hand covering the side of his face. "Are you all right?" "I will be." He looked down at his attacker, face full of contempt. "We're done with him." "Yes, I doubt he has anything of value left to say." Daniel shot her a roguish smile which she read like a book. "That remains to be seen." Looking down, she saw Robertson's data lens lying at Daniel's feet, and understanding dawned on her. "Let's get out of here."
An hour later, Daniel sat at the kitchen table navigating through the data he'd extracted from Robertson's data lens while Anna held a cold pack against the left side of his face. On the bus back to the safe house, he'd explained to her that after Robertson had knocked him down, it had taken him less than a second to inject a back door into the data lens, and now they had remote access to it. If Robertson ever looked for what he'd done, it wouldn't be hard to find. But Daniel pointed out that, by Robertson's own admission, He was not exactly the technical type. He'd admitted to Anna that what he did carried some risk. If he goes to Radon, they'll find the back door and close it, so I'm pulling whatever information I can off before doing anything else. That way, if they remove the hack, we won't lose it. But if he runs away instead, then I'm tracking his location. If we're ever back in good graces with the law, you can arrest him. As Daniel worked, he knew the most important implication from the conversation with Robertson was that it almost certainly confirmed their theory that someone was setting up a better way. Radon had manipulated Ben Jacobs, not a better way, so the key was determining who employed them. Daniel knew Anna suspected it was a government agency. This was the reason he pored over the information from Robertson's data lens. It contained far more relevant data than his home data systems had. As he worked, he realized his discomfort at violating the man's privacy had evaporated. He supposed it helped with misgivings when a person fattens your jaw. He apprised Anna of his progress. I'm finding Robertson's consulting work basically amounts to social engineering. Nearly everything he does is manipulation, predominantly of women. Not Ben Jacobs. No, I guess his natural charisma works on men too. Are any clients named? No. We might be able to run through his specific assignments and check who the people he targeted worked for. Maybe we could reverse engineer some client names based on that, but no one is ever directly mentioned as hiring him. What about the location data you have? Can you determine where he's been? I'm checking that next. I'll show you. He pulled his head away from the cold pack, finding it to be distracting at the moment, and brought up a map of the city and shared it with her. With a few keystrokes and a gesture, he overlaid the coordinate history from Robertson's data lens over it. White dots appeared all over the city, brighter where he had spent more time. Robertson's apartment was the most vivid, with Radon Security's main office building close behind. I'm guessing we should look deeper into the more frequent spots. Anna put the cold pack down on the kitchen table and gestured to rotate the image, inspecting it from a different angle. The only problem is that his social engineering jobs tended to take him to his clients' competitors, not the clients themselves. True enough, though I'm curious about this spot down on the southeast side. Which one? He selected the dot to highlight it on the map for her. Here, Robertson traveled to this place quite a few times. It might be some kind of Radon asset that's off the books. Because it doesn't correlate to any known holdings? Exactly. He drilled into the dot and brought up details about the building. It's held by a company named Office Solutions, which has no recorded business transactions. Looks like it's zoned for storage. I suspect a warehouse. Anna stroked her cheek thoughtfully. You know what's interesting about where that is? He turned his head, interested. No idea. It's within the zone of the missing MMDs from 2 weeks ago. She was referring to the busted sting the agency had attempted, but he didn't understand zone in this context. What do you mean? When the buyer backed out of the sale, I had tracking data on the seller. I thought I could trace the bus and figure out where the cargo ended up, but whoever ran the operation disabled vid recordings, so he lost it. They blanked out a whole section of the city for multiple buses, and this is in that area. Interesting. How big a section are you talking about? Several blocks, so maybe this isn't related at all, but I don't believe in coincidences. Neither do I. Does this mean we're going to do more breaking and entering? I think it does. She grinned. Are you getting more comfortable with that now? He grunted. I'll get back to you on that.